Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor B. Hariharan from the Institute of English, University of Kerala. The paper that we are looking at is 20th century English literature, and the module that we'll be discussing now is on Roots by Arnold Weskers. Let's straight away get into the text. Arnold Weskers was born in 1932. He is very famous for his plays that were written during the 1950s and 60s. His Jewish parents were active communists, working class, and belonged to the working class environment. He worked as a furniture maker's apprentice, he worked as a farm laborer, as a pastry cook. It was while working in a hotel in Norwich that he conceived this idea of his first play, The Kitchen. This play had disillusionment with socialist ideals as its main theme. We must also remember that The Kitchen was conceived in 1959, and this was the time when the Angry Young Men group had emerged in England. Notable among them, as you know, was John Osborne. Weskers had once said that he had watched Look Back in Anger and realized that he could write a play. He could do it, and that's how he wrote the first play of the Weskers trilogy, Chicken Soup with Barley. Now, we will look at the other important works of Weskers. There is a collection of lectures that he had given titled Fears of Fragmentation, 2 collections of short stories, there is a memoir, he has written a novel, there is 1 collection of poetry. But then we are looking at his plays now. I was talking about the Weskers trilogy. The first play, Chicken Soup with Barley. The second play is what we are looking at now in detail, Roots. The third one is I am talking about Jerusalem. And there are 3 more plays that he has, Chips with Everything and Caritas, a play in 2 acts, and in 1994 came Wild Spring and other plays. He has 2 television plays also to his credit. We need to go back and look a little bit at English drama in the 1950s and 60s. We must remember that these plays depicted the post-World War II decade, the 1950s especially. Now, this was the time of the rise of the welfare state, and there were discussions about access to education. Now, what happened was, after the World War, you had a number of educated unemployed youth. This gave way to a whole lot of anger and frustration. Now, it is against this background that we need to look at the Angry Young Men group. Now, along with this, there were the other themes that came up was the rural versus urban setting. Now, this greatly does inform the play that we are looking at. Another concern that came up during the 50s and 60s was the portrayal of the working class or the lower middle class English society. Other themes that gained prominence during this time was themes of self-discovery, class, cultural identity. Now, this is very interesting because this was the time, again the 50s was the time when absurd drama also was gaining prominence. At the same time, you had plays here that were talking about ordinary people. You're talking about the day-to-day reality of life, of living. So, these plays were giving you another kind of realism or reality, and these plays derived their force because of this kind of an engagement. So, we have this other very interesting strand, as it were, when we look at English drama of the 50s and 60s. Now, we will try to identify some of these playwrights who were writing in the 50s and 60s. One obvious name is John Osborne's and his play Look Back in Anger, Arnold Weskers' Chicken Soup with Barley, Sheila Delany, A Taste of Honey, and John Arden, Sergeant Musgrave's Dance. There are many, many more. Now, we now have some kind of an awareness of the playwrights and the plays that were written during this period. Now, I think we need to learn to look at the features that structure, that shape kitchen sink drama. Why are they called kitchen sink drama? That's not because they were set inside the kitchen. They talked about social reality. They talked about everyday life. They talked about the way in which the lower middle class and the middle class worked hard and earned their bread, and the way in which they went about their life. We will also try to identify some themes that are present in these plays. We will also look at the language, the form, and the content of these plays, the way in which these plays are structured. We will also, by this, perhaps understand the relevance of the plays today. Now, when we talk about kitchen sink drama, we are talking about, as I said earlier, a kind of realism. Now, this is a term that was coined to describe a British cultural movement that developed in the late 50s and the 60s. Now, there is this classic book titled The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. Now, this is a book that really captures that anger. This is a novel, so I urge you to take a look at this novel also. Now, this is a movement to come back to kitchen sink realism. This is something that developed, as I said, in the late 50s and the early 1960s in not just theatre. It was there in theatre, it was there in art, in novels, in film, in television, where the heroes were angry. They were all angry young men, and we know why they were angry. It used a kind of social realism which depicted working class English people living in rented accommodation, spending their time in dimly lit, dirty pubs, exploring social issues, trying to become part of or even engage in political controversies. Now, this was the background, this is the background that we need to keep in mind when we think about the angry young men and kitchen sink drama. It will be good to look at the cultural climate in England before you read kitchen sink drama proper. Now, this is an additional work that can be done to augment these resources that you are getting here. We will now turn our attention to the features of kitchen sink drama. Now, these are very specific things which need to be elaborated as you read and become familiar with some of these plays and some of these writers. Now, these plays had roots, as it were, in socialism. They tried to convey a socialist message. Now, these plays were opposed to the kind of romantic or romanticized plays that were very popular, particularly let's say the name that comes to mind immediately is of Terence Rattigan. And so you had these plays that were very unlike those plays that were very popular, that were easily perhaps at that point digestible for the audience. The setting for these plays was always urban, and when you talk about urban, it was congested, very crowded. So you could feel the stifling atmosphere in which people lived. What about the rural people, rural lives? It was impoverished. There was poverty. So you had poverty, you had this not very comfortable living conditions, and then there was this failure of communication, a total failure of communication. This is something that you find happening a lot in much of post-World War literature. There is an abundance of black humor in these plays, and this is something that we also had seen, that we also would see when we read or watch absurd plays. Invariably, in all these plays, you would have educated but angry and frustrated youth. Frustration was something that emerged very powerfully, very strongly in these plays. The characters that you have, the working class characters who are present are all invariably very poor, and that also gives you the kind of background, the kind of setting, the kind of things that these plays would be trying to talk about. There is a very important theme here that emerges, that is the theme of self-discovery. Now, this is a theme that you see very clearly articulated in a play like Roots. And there are struggles that you have with class or cultural identities, or class and cultural identities. So there are struggles here. When you look at kitchen sink drama, you find that there are struggles at multiple levels. It could be in terms of, let's say, the way in which you lead your lives, the way in which you try to make sense of what you are and where you are. You try to make sense of the anger that you have, the way in which you learn how to live here. This is a big struggle that you have. What is the place for romanticism here? So these are things that we need to be aware of when we look at plays by Arnold, Weskers or Arden. Now we will look specifically at Roots. This is the second play of Weskers' trilogy. Now, this has been rated as one of the 100 most important 20th century English language plays. This is by the National Theatre, and you just need to look at the visuals that accompany this class to see this whole idea of self-affirmation, of trying to identify and understand who and what you are, and that becomes even more significant here when it happens to be a young girl who comes home to share the fact that to tell this news that she has a new fiance and she wants to get married, and she wants to introduce this young man. Now, this is the skeletal story of Roots. We will look at the characters in this play first. There is B.T. Bryant. She is if you want to use the word heroine, she is the heroine of this play. Jenny and Jimmy Beals, Mrs. and Mr. Bryant. Jenny is her sister, Mrs. and Mr. Bryant her parents, Pearl and Frankie Bryant, Stan Mann, Mr. Healy, Ronnie. Ronnie Can is the fiancé. Now, there are 3 acts to this play, and the second act has 2 scenes. Now, the setting, the whole action takes place in the family home of B.T. Bryant. Now, this gives us some idea of the structure of the play and the characters here. We will look at the setting of the play. The play opens in the home of Jenny and Jimmy Beals, and it's here that the main character, the protagonist, is introduced. B.T. Bryant is living in London, and she is making a visit home, and she doesn't do this often. This is a very rare visit. Now, B.T.'s boyfriend Ronnie seems to believe that people who are living in the rural areas are in mystic communion with nature. This is what he believes. There certainly is a big divide or a difference between the urban and the rural. Now, the tedious life of the Beals are disturbed by this bubbly, energetic girl BT, because she is coming from the city. She is full of vitality, full of energy. She jumps up and down, she dances, she sings, she speaks, she talks endlessly. There's so much of energy in her, and this is something that you can contrast, that we contrast with the tedious or even the sedentary, laid back life in the village, in the rural area. Now, that life is disturbed by the arrival, as I said, of this young girl. Now, she comes and she sees this life, the life that they live here, and she is very critical of it. And Jenny's husband, Jenny is BT's sister, Jenny's husband Jimmy reacts to this very angrily. He is very much provoked. Now, BT somehow dotes on her boyfriend naturally, and then she is somehow carried away by his ideals, maybe perhaps without fully understanding what they are, and glibly kind of quotes him copiously. Whenever she wants to say anything, she would quote her boyfriend, and she thinks no end of him, and she's waiting. She really wants him to come and join her so that he will be introduced to her parents. So this is how the first act opens. There is one line that Ronnie, for example, keeps telling her, and she keeps mouthing it without even thinking what it is. Something wrong with comics all the time. Now, this is what Ronnie had told her, and then she keeps mouthing it all the time. So this is the first act. This is how the act begins. And these are some of the things that we get to understand when we look at the first act. Now, she's so energetic that she hops and jumps throughout this act, and you would see her standing, and then as though she is talking to a big group, a big crowd. Whenever she has to say something, whenever she quotes Ronnie, she would stand up and then raise her hands and then quote Ronnie with full energy and full vigor. Jimmy does not approve of people in the town who read books, who have a lot of leisure, who see paintings, who listen to classical music, because that's a very different culture, because there is time, there is leisure. But then what would people in the rural areas have? There is work. What facilities do they have? So it is very difficult, and this could be perhaps one reason why Jimmy disapproves of people from the town. Now, BT, as I said, keeps saying this. There is something wrong with comics all the time, and it's not that she says this. She would even go to the extent of singing this. She talks to Jenny, she talks to her sister about her relationship with Ronnie, and the fact that perhaps he will be joining her, and so that he can be introduced. Now, at the end of this act, Stan, a very rich man who was rich at one time, appears. He is now poor, drunk. He is a tragicomic character, paralyzed by drunkenness, so he is a chronic alcoholic. So here is this man. He also stands for this, for the way in which life is being led. Now, what we have here is a contrast between the life that Jenny leads and the life that BT wants to lead. Right? So there is this contrast between the characters of Jenny and BT in this play. Now, this is something that we get to see in the first act itself. Now, after this, the scene in the second act, in the first scene, the scene, the act opens in BT's parents' house. Now, this house, compared to the first one, has electricity. Jenny's house has no electricity. Now, this house is a little bit more modern in the sense that there is electricity. Now, this is very interesting because we need to keep this in mind. This is a play that was staged in the mid 50s. Now, we need to look at a place like India. When did houses started? When were houses getting electrified, as it were? So the situation is something. I'm not saying very similar, but the situation is something that merits a closer attention. Now, Daphne Bryant, Beatty's mother, is a rural housewife. She is frustrated. There's a lot of boredom, loneliness. She has a pet cat and she is fond of music. But then there is boredom. She talks with Stan Man while she is peeling potatoes. Now, her conversation with Stan tells you that she had a past which was happy, which she really enjoyed. It was a happy past. Now, that thing is captured in a statement like this: you do go up and down in your spirits. Now, her father, BT's father, Jack, is a mean and miserly person. He is worried about his job. The mother and daughter, Daphne and BT, are poles apart in their attitude and in their temperament. BT's parents are not at all interested in the life that their daughter is leading in London. London somehow did not interest them. Now, the action here is slow paced, but you have a vivid portrayal of the daily routine. You have water pails being filled and cakes being baked. So, the routine, everyday routine, is taken up here for elaboration, and you get to see this on stage if you ever happen to watch this play. Mr. Healy is the boss of BT's father, and he arrives and he reveals another side of Mr. Bryant's character. He is not like this at home. In front of his boss, he is very respectful and submissive. Now, what it does is portray the relationship between the manager and the worker in the farming community. Now, there is a touching moment in this act, and that is the news that they receive of the tragic death of Stan Man. The first scene ends with Jack's vehement protests at BT baking a cake for Ronnie. Now, this is something that Jack somehow doesn't like, and she insists on baking this cake. She is also upset over her parents' bitterness at the end of the scene, and it ends with lunch. So, there is a lot of bitterness in the family. Now, it's there, you can see that in the conversations, let's say, between BT and her mother. Now, there are things that are simmering, there are things that are brewing in the first act. Now, let us first and then the second scene also. In the first scene, you do see that, you can see it again in the second scene. Now, it's the same setting, there is a quarrel that's continuing. Now, BT is the mediator. Now, there's a quarrel again now between the parents. She tries to solve this problem, this issue between the parents. There is a filling of the bath. It's a slow activity, and this is something that dominates the scene. That tells you something about the life that these people live in rural England. There is a conversation, as I said earlier, between the mother and the daughter. They gossip, they exchange gossip, and then of course in that process BT also talks about and quotes the kind of things that Ronnie used to say. It's very interesting here to note that we note this, how much of what BT is saying she has really understood. She seems to be repeating like a parrot whatever Ronnie had said. Now, by the time we come to the end of the play, we would see a very different BT. Now, this is really the transformation that we see in this play. Now, BT accuses her mother of not permitting her to listen to music or read books. Now, the scene ends harmoniously in the sense that the mother also enjoys the music that is played. Now, we come to the third act. In the third act, the setting is again BT's parents' home. Now, the whole family is waiting for the arrival of Ronnie. Ronnie is a Jewish boy, incidentally. Now, they have not seen him. He is mysterious. Daphne, the mother, has prepared a feast to welcome the future son-in-law. This young girl, this bubbly girl, is anxious to show off her boyfriend to her parents, her siblings Jenny, Frank, their spouses Jimmy and Pearl. Now, as they are waiting, there's a riddle that she throws to everyone. Now, she sings, there is song, she is so enthused because she thinks that Ronnie is about to arrive. At that time, suddenly, there's a letter that arrives from Ronnie. It arrives from London. Now, we don't know why, but then the letter tells us that Ronnie will not come after all, that he won't be able to make it. Now, this is something that changes the entire atmosphere of the play. Daphne reads aloud Ronnie's letter. BT is shocked, upset. She can't believe it. She can't believe this. No, he ain't coming. The dialect is from Norfolk. So she can't believe it. Reactions are there. There's a lot of confusion. Her parents are indifferent. Jenny is quite sympathetic. At this point, Mrs. Bryant makes an ironic comment. The apple don't fall far from the tree that it don't. Now, BT is very upset. There's an outburst. This provokes the mother to slap her daughter, and she challenges her to talk. Now, this is the turning point in the play. Now, BT stops quoting Ronnie. This is the final moment when she knows, she feels her real confidence, and this is what gives her strength to move on in life. I am beginning on my own 2 feet. Back. I am beginning on my own 2 feet. I am beginning. That's the song. So this is the newly found confidence that she has. Yes. She stands alone. She is articulate. She now realizes that her family will continue to live as they live, whatever she does. But then she is confident. She is on her own. Now this is the turning point for her. This is how the play ends. Now let's look at characterization. We'll look at some of these characters. Jenny and Jimmy. Jenny is contrasted with BT. We saw that she is down to earth, she is likable, she has led a very tough life. They don't have any facilities, modern amenities. There is a tone of discontent. Jimmy, on the other hand, is blunt. He is outspoken. He speaks against Ronnie's ideas. Now, Jenny is very warm. She is very caring. She loves her sister. She has a lot of sympathy towards her. Now, when we look at BT, it's slightly different. She is, as I said earlier, she is very lively. She dominates the whole plot. She visits home, it's a very rare visit. She wants to show off her London avatar and her boyfriend. She keeps on quoting Ronnie's principles, his ideals often. Then you start wondering, doesn't she have anything to say on her own? But then that final rejection enables her to cross the threshold, and then she becomes articulate. Now, what we have here is BT's transformation into an intellectual thinking woman. This is the takeaway of this play. Let's now look at the other characters. Stanman. We said he's a paralytic drunk. He was rich. He's a pathetic figure. He evokes our sympathy. He dies a tragic death. Now, Stanman, what does he stand for? He is a symbol of a golden past before modernization set in. And so what you have in him in the play, when you see him as a symbol of degeneration and decay. So what you have in Stan is a critique of the entire modernization program. Mr. and Mrs. Bryant, they are BT's parents. They are not at all interested in what she is doing. Jack, the father, is mean, selfish. The mother is bored and frustrated. They don't care when Ronnie doesn't turn up. They ignore their daughter's hysteria and emotional reactions. Now, Daphne is quite harsh towards her daughter, but then this perhaps enables BT to become articulate, and she speaks. Now, let's try to sum up some of these major arguments that we have. The major theme of the play revolves around BT's growth into an articulate individual. The play also showcases this conflict between the rural world as having a very dull, sedentary environment and the urban world as something very, very stimulating. Now, Roots is, it has been said, an unparalleled achievement. It's a profoundly moving embodiment in imaginative terms of Weskers' generation's experience. Now, I think it is important that you look at this play. There are multiple possibilities to read this play. For instance, it might be very interesting to focus exclusively on BT, to look at the emerging or the emergent woman of the 50s. Now, it could be possible to come up with multiple readings of the play. Now, what I have been talking about now has not attempted to do that, but then I am just trying to throw open some of these possibilities for you to take up. But then for you to do this kind of a reading, you will have to go back, go to the text and read it, and then try to see how you can develop some of these arguments. All the best, and thank you.